Chapter 15, The Unicity of God. The conclusion is evident that there can be but one God. If there were many gods, they would be called by this name either equivocally or univocally. If they are called gods equivocally, further discussion is fruitless. There is nothing to prevent other peoples from applying the name God to what we call a stone. If they are called gods univocally, they must agree either in genus or in species. But we have just shown that God can be neither a genus nor a species comprising many individuals under himself. Accordingly, a multiplicity of gods is impossible. Again, that whereby a common essence is individuated cannot pertain to many. Although there can be many men, it is impossible for this particular man to be more than one only. So if an essence is individuated by itself and not by something else, it cannot pertain to many. But the divine essence is individuated by itself, since God's essence is not distinct from his existence. For we have shown that God is his essence. Hence, God cannot be more than one only. Another consideration is the following. A form can be multiplied in two ways. First, by specific differences, as in the case of a generic form. In this way, color is differentiated into the various species of color. Secondly, by the subjects in which it inheres, for example, whiteness. Therefore, any form incapable of being multiplied by specific differences cannot be multiplied at all, if it is a form that does not exist in a subject. Thus, whiteness, if it were to subsist without a subject, would not be more than one. But the divine essence is very existence, ipsum esse, which does not admit of specific differences, as we have shown. Since, therefore, the divine existence is a quasi-form subsisting by itself, seeing that God is his existence, the divine essence cannot be more than one. Accordingly, a plurality of gods is impossible. Chapter 16, God not a body. It is evident further that God himself cannot be a body. For in every body some composition is found, since a body has parts. Hence that which is absolutely simple cannot be a body. Moreover, we find that a body does not move anything else unless it is first moved itself, as will appear clearly to anyone who examines the matter fully. So if the first mover is absolutely immovable, that being cannot be a body. Chapter 17, God neither the form of a body nor a force in a body. God cannot be the form of a body or any kind of force existing in a body. For, since all bodies are found to be mobile, whatever is present in a body must be moved, at least per accidens or concomitantly, if the body itself is moved. The first mover, however, cannot be moved either per se or per accidens, for it must be absolutely immobile, as has been shown. Therefore, God cannot be a body or a force in a body. Again, in order to move an object, every mover must have dominion over the thing that is moved. For we observe that motion is more rapid in proportion as the motive force exceeds the resisting force of the mobile object. Therefore, that which is the very first among all movers must predominate supremely over all the things moved. But this would be impossible if the mover were in any way attached to the mobile object, as it would have to be if it were the form or motive power of the latter. Consequently, the first mover cannot be a body or a force in a body or a form in a body. This is why Anaxagoras postulated an intelligence liberated from matter, that it might rule and move all things. Chapter 18, the infinity of God according to essence. This leads to the question of God's infinity. God is not infinite by way of privation, according to which infinity is a passion of quantity. In this sense, whatever lacks limits, but is nevertheless capable of having limits by reason of its genus, is said to be infinite. Rather, God is infinite negatively, in the sense that a being that is unlimited in every way is infinite. No act is found to be limited except by a potency that is receptive of the act. Thus we observe that forms are limited in accordance with the potency of matter. Hence, if the first mover is an act without any admixture of potency, as not being the form of any body or a force inheriting in a body, it must be infinite. The very order perceived in things is a proof of this. The higher the position occupied in the scale of being, the greater are things found to be in their own way. Among the elements, nobler things are found to be greater in quantity, as also in simplicity. Their generation demonstrates this. As the proportion of the respective elements is increased, fire is generated from air, air from water, and water from earth. And a heavenly body clearly exceeds the total quantity of the elements. Necessarily, therefore, that which is the first among beings and which has nothing above it must in its own fashion be of infinite quantity. Nor is there anything to wonder at if what is simple and lacks corporeal quantity is said to be infinite and to exceed in its immensity all quantity of body. For our own intellect, which is incorporeal and simple, exceeds the quantity of all bodies in virtue of its knowledge and embraces all things. Much more, then, that which is the very first of all exceeds the universe of beings in its immensity and embraces them all. Chapter 19, Infinite Power of God. The further inference is drawn that God is infinite in power, for power is consequent upon a thing's essence. Anything, whatever possesses a power of activity consonant with its matter of being. Therefore, if God is infinite in his essence, his power must be infinite. This is clear to anyone who will inspect the order of things. Whatever is in potency is thereby endowed with receptive and passive power, and so far as a thing is in act, it possesses active power. Hence, what is exclusively in potency, namely prime matter, has an unlimited power of receptivity, but has no part in active power. And in the scale of being above matter, the more a thing has of form, the more it abounds in the power of acting. This is why fire is the most active of all the elements. Therefore God, who is pure act, without any admixture of potency, infinitely abounds in active power above all things. Chapter 20. Absence of imperfection in God's infinity. Although the infinity discerned in quantities is imperfect, the infinity predicated of God indicates supreme perfection in him. The infinity that is in quantities pertains to matter, in the sense that matter lacks limits. Imperfection occurs in a thing for the reason that matter is found in a state of privation. On the other hand, perfection comes exclusively from form. Consequently, since God is infinite, because he is exclusively form or act and has no admixture of matter or potentiality, his infinity pertains to his supreme perfection. This can also be gathered from a consideration of other things. Although in one and the same being that evolves from imperfect to perfect, something imperfect precedes the perfect stage. As for example, the boy is prior to the man, everything imperfect must derive from its origin from what is perfect. The child is not begotten except by a man, and the seed does not receive existence except from an animal or a plant. Accordingly, that which is by nature prior to all other things and sets them all in motion must be more perfect than all the rest. Chapter 21. Eminent existence in God of all perfections found in creatures. The further inference clearly follows that all perfections found in anything at all must originally and superabundantly be present in God. Whatever moves something toward perfection must first possess in itself the perfection it confers on others. Thus, a teacher has in his own mind the knowledge he hands on to others. Therefore, since God is the first mover, and moves all other beings toward their perfections, all perfections found in things must pre-exist in him superabundantly. Besides, whatever has a particular perfection but lacks another perfection is contained under some genus or species. For each thing is classed under a genus or a species by its form, which is the thing's perfection. But what is placed under species and genus cannot be infinite in essence, for the ultimate difference whereby it is placed in a species necessarily closes off its essence. Hence, the very ratio or description that makes a species known is called its definition or even finis. Therefore, if the divine essence is infinite, it cannot possess merely the perfection of some genus or species and be lacking in other perfections. The perfections of all genera or species must be in God. Chapter 22. Unity of all perfections in God. If we gather together the various points established thus far, we perceive that all perfections in God are in reality one. We have shown above that God is simple, but where there is simplicity, there can be no distinction among the perfections that are present. Hence, if the perfections of all things are in God, they cannot be distinct in him. Accordingly, they are all one in him. This will become evident to anyone who reflects on our cognitive powers. A higher faculty has a unified knowledge of all that is known through the lower faculties according to diverse aspects. All that the sight, the hearing, and the other senses perceive, the intellect judges with the one simple power that belongs to it. Something similar appears in the sciences. The lower sciences are multiplied in accord with the various classes of beings that constitute their objects. Yet one science which holds a primacy among them is interested in all classes of beings. This is known as first philosophy. The same situation is observed in civil power, in the royal power, which is but one. Are included all the powers that are distributed through various offices within the jurisdiction of the kingdom. In the same way, perfections, which in lower things are multiplied according to the diversity of these things, must be united in the pinnacle of being, that is, in God. Chapter 23. Absence of accidents in God. It is also clear that there can be no accident in God. If all perfections are one in him, and if existence, power, action, and all such attributes pertain to perfection, they are necessarily all identical with his essence. Therefore, none of these perfections is an accident in God. Furthermore, a being to whose perfection something can be added cannot be infinite in perfection. But if a being has some perfection that is an accident, a perfection can be added to its essence, since every accident is superadded to essence. Hence, infinite perfection will not be found in its essence. But, as we have shown, God is of infinite perfection according to essence. Consequently, there can be in him no accidental perfection. Whatever is in him is his substance. The same truth can be easily inferred from God's supreme simplicity, and from the fact that he is pure act and is the first among beings. For some sort of composition obtains between an accident and its subject. Likewise, that which is a subject of this kind cannot be pure act, since an accident is a certain form or act of the subject. Similarly, what is per se always precedes what is per accidens. From all this, we can infer, in keeping with the truths established above, that nothing can be predicated of God as an accident. Chapter 24. God's simplicity, not contradicted by the multiplicity of names applied to him. This enables us to perceive the reason for the many names that are applied to God, even though in himself he is absolutely simple. Since our intellect is unable to grasp his essence as it is in itself, we rise to a knowledge of that essence from the things that surround us. Various perfections are discerned in these things, the root and origin of them all being one in God, as has been shown. Since we cannot name an object except as we understand it, for names are signs of things understood, we cannot give names to God except in terms of perfections perceived in other things that have their origin in him. And since these perfections are multiple in such things, we must assign many names to God. If we saw his essence as it is in itself, a multiplicity of names would not be required. Our idea of it would be simple, just as his essence is simple. This vision we hope for in the day of our glory, for according to Zechariah 14:9, in that day there shall be one Lord, and his name shall be one. Chapter 25. The names of God not synonymous. In this connection, 3 observations are in order. The first is that the various names applied to God are not synonymous, even though they signify what is in reality the same thing in God. In order to be synonymous, names must signify the same thing, and besides must stand for the same intellectual conception. But when the same object is signified according to diverse aspects, that is, notions which the mind forms of that object, the names are not synonymous. For then the meaning is not quite the same, since names directly signify intellectual conceptions, which are likenesses of things. Therefore, since the various names predicated of God signify the various conceptions our mind forms of him, they are not synonymous, even though they signify absolutely the same thing. Chapter 26. Impossibility of defining God. The second point is this. Since our intellect does not adequately grasp the divine essence in any of the conceptions which the names applied to God signify, the definitions of these terms cannot define what is in God. That is, any definition we might formulate of the divine wisdom would not be a definition of the divine power, and so on regarding other attributes. The same is clear for another reason. A definition is made up of genus and specific differences, for what is properly defined is the species. But we have shown that the divine essence is not included under any genus or species. Therefore, it cannot be defined. Chapter 27, Analogy of terms predicated of God and of other beings. The third point is that names applied to God and to other beings are not predicated either quite univocally or quite equivocally. They cannot be predicated univocally because the definition of what is said of a creature is not a definition of what is said of God. Things predicated univocally must have the same definition. Nor are these names predicated in all respects equivocally. In the case of fortuitous equivocation, a name is attached to an object that has no relation to another object bearing the same name. Hence, the reasoning in which we engage about one cannot be transferred to the other, but the names predicated of God and of other things are attributed to God according to some relation he has to those things, and in their case the mind ponders what the names signify. This is why we can transfer our reasoning about other things to God. Therefore, such terms are not predicated altogether equivocally about God and about other things, as happens in fortuitous equivocation. Consequently, they are predicated according to analogy, that is, according to their proportion to one thing. For from the fact that we compare other things with God as their first origin, we attribute to God such names as signify perfections in other things. This clearly brings out the truth that, as regards the assigning of the names, such names are primarily predicated of creatures, inasmuch as the intellect that assigns the names ascends from creatures to God. But as regards the thing signified by the name, they are primarily predicated of God, from whom the perfections descend to other beings. Chapter 28, The Intelligence of God. We must go on to demonstrate that God is intelligent. We have already proved that all perfections of all beings, whatsoever, pre-exist in God superabundantly. Among all the perfections found in beings, intelligence is deemed to possess a special preeminence, for the reason that intellectual beings are more powerful than all others. Therefore, God must be intelligent. Moreover, we pointed out above that God is pure act, without any admixture of potentiality. On the other hand, matter is being in potency. Consequently, God must be utterly free from matter. But freedom from matter is the cause of intellectuality. An indication of this is that material forms are rendered intelligible in act by being abstracted from matter and from material conditions. Therefore, God is intelligent. We proved further that God is the first mover. This very perfection appears to be a property of intellect, for the intellect, we observe, uses all other things as instruments, so to speak, in producing movement. Thus man, through his intellect, uses animals and plants and inanimate objects as instruments of a sort to cause motion. Consequently, God, the first mover, must be intelligent. Chapter 29. God's intelligence, not potential or habitual, but actual. Since in God nothing is in potency, but all is in act, as has been shown, God cannot be intelligent either potentially or habitually, but only actually. An evident consequence of this is that he undergoes no succession in understanding. The intellect that understands a number of things successively is able, while actually understanding one thing, to understand another only potentially. But there is no succession among things that exist simultaneously. So if God understands nothing in potency, his understanding is free from all succession. Accordingly, whatever he understands simultaneously. Furthermore, he does not begin to understand anything. For the intellect that begins to understand something was previously in potency to understanding. It is likewise evident that God's intellect does not understand in discursive fashion, proceeding from one truth to a knowledge of another, as is the case with our intellect in reasoning. A discursive process of this sort takes place in our intellect when we advance from the known to a knowledge of the unknown, or to that which previously we had not actually thought of. Such processes cannot occur in the divine intellect.